Chapter 31. It took them nearly half an hour to reach the top of the street, which ended up on a countryside trail that overlooked the entire village. Sitting down beside Malou, both visibly exhausted, Dan stared into the distance. This is so beautiful. Why would anyone want to leave this place is beyond me. Is it that you'd forgotten the rumours of war that was menacing to strangle this village out of existence? Damiano said, hankering down in front of Dan. But this village is far from the coast. How could people be so scared as to flee for their lives? There was a lack of understanding, and fear of the unknown often drives people to do irrational things, Dan, and perhaps you shouldn't blame your father for fleeing this country while he still could to more hospitable grounds. I guess we won't ever be able to grasp the idea that such conflict could even exist since we've never seen or experienced it in America, Dan remarked pensively. What about your mum? Didn't she flee Germany before the war too? Malou asked, massaging her ankle. Ah, very good question indeed, they heard Damien say from behind them. Dan and Malou turned around to see their guardian angels walk down the field that bordered the trail, and I think once you understand and perhaps visualize what was happening throughout Europe during the Second World War, you might better understand why your father and mother's families fled their countries. But wasn't there a place where they could take refuge? Dan asked, his mind obviously refusing to acknowledge that the events which engulfed the whole of Europe at that time could uproot anyone from their home. No, Dan, there wasn't. 60 million lives were lost in the space of 5 years. For those who survived, the horrors of war remained in their memories until they too died. Dan shook his head, which he bent between his extended arms over his knees. I just wish they could never have left, that's all. It was a cry for understanding. I know they've been the best parents in the world, Damien, but I just wish I was able to live here. His voice trailed off. Damien went to sit beside him, while Solangi sat down beside Malou. You know, Dan, Solangi said, most of us in America are sons and daughters of immigrants. Be it 200 or 300 years ago or right now, our parents or grandparents all had a reason for searching to find happiness somewhere else than in their homeland. She looked ahead of her at the valley below the trail. If one day you wish to come back for a time, perhaps to show your children where their ancestors live, I think you should accede to that wish and make it a reality. Yes, I guess that's perhaps what we should do. Dan turned his head to Malou. What do you think, honey? Would you want to come back here some day with the kids? You know I would. Besides, the children have visited Haiti, the land of my parents, on many occasions, so maybe it's time they came here too. She smiled at her husband and then threw a glance at Damianos. Do you think you could do something about that ankle of mine? It's starting to swell and it hurts. Damianos shot a glance to Damien, who nodded, and within seconds of snapping his fingers, the 5 of them found themselves sitting on wooden chairs around an old fire pit in some sort of grotto. I don't think I'll ever get used to the quick change of scenery, Dan remarked, chuckling and looking at Damianos sitting across from him. And where are we now? This is the Pension New Jersica, Solangi informed him, and we're sitting in what used to be the kitchen of the house. This looks as if it's been built centuries ago, Malou remarked, looking around her at the stone walls and ceiling. Yes, as a matter of fact, the whole house is built of stones that have been transported from the nearby Jesenki Mountains at the outskirts of Sumperk in the Czech Republic. You mean this is where my mother used to live? Dan erupted, getting to his feet to pass his hands around the stone wall surrounding the pit. Perhaps not in this very house, Dan, but yes, this is the village from which your grandparents escaped when the Germans were ready to wage war against Western Europe once again. This is incredible, Dan said, walking around in sheer wonder. And these people built this whole house stone by stone? Yes, Dan, Damien replied. People had fortitude and strength of character. They didn't shrug in face of toils and labours. Speed wasn't of the essence then. Lasting reminder of their family values was. And this house escaped the ruins of war because of its location? Malou asked. Yes, it was built, as you will soon see when we go to the gardens, on the foothills of the mountains and away from prime target areas. You know, I often thought castles were built in stones and the rest of the habitations were constructed of less resistant material. Not always, Dan, Damien said. Actually, if stones were available, people would build their homes with them. Solangi looked at both Dan and Malou in turn. And now I think perhaps it's time to go to the garden terrace, have some tea, and for you, Dan, to open the book once again. Good idea, Dan said, throwing a glance to Malou. How's your ankle? I don't know. She stared down at it. Look, it's not swollen anymore. She stood up. That's amazing. How did that happen? she asked Damianos. That's because you're now in another place and another time, he replied, smiling. Gosh, I should have you around the next time I twist my ankle, Malou said, laughing and taking Dan's extended hand. Damianos, walking ahead of the couples, led them through the house and outside on the courtyard and the terrace beyond. Built as a large deck overlooking the Jesenicky Mountains, the sun deck was furnished of garden chairs and tables, with parasols shading the patrons from the afternoon sun rays. Look at these flowers, Malou exclaimed, going up the steps leading to the deck. They're magnificent. And everything smells as if washed in the last rain, Dan rejoined. Taking a seat around a table nearest to the far end of the deck, they relaxed for a moment before the hotel waitress came and asked if they wanted something to drink. Damien ordered tea for Malou and Dan and told the young woman that he and his wife and friend would have something later. When the waitress was out of earshot, Damien placed the book in front of Dan, saying, I think you will learn a great deal from this task. Well, let's see what we have to do next then, Dan replied, opening the book. Since this is your 11th task and perhaps the most important one for you to remember in the days and months ahead, it is time to give consideration to what you have accomplished thus far. Fortitude and force of character was the crowning and underlying trait to all the tasks you have undertaken to this day. Fortitude has helped you to be more tolerant toward others, to accept the hand you have been dealt, to enjoy the severity of enmity, to show humility in face of extravagance, to display determination in face of hindrance, to cast your eyes away from temptation, to persevere in your chosen task, to have the patience to preserve your endeavours, and to impart trust to deserving parties, and ultimately to forgive yourself for your misguided pursuits. Therefore, fortitude will assist you in overcoming all problems that may be ahead of you in this task. Remember, you are made of a cloth that will not accept defeat as an inevitable outcome. Dan closed the book. The waitress reappeared, carrying a tray with a teapot, cups and saucers, milk jug and sugar bowl. She deposited it between Dan and Malou without a word, but with a broad smile appearing on her gentle lips. Dankeschön, Damien said, as she retreated. What are your thoughts right now, Dan? He asked. To tell you the truth, Damien, I'm amazed. I have no ready words to tell you how I feel right now. He paused while watching Malou pour tea in their cups. It's as if I passed my entire life in review in one paragraph. I know we've been on this road for only a short time now, but it seems as if I have relived my whole life since we left the hospital. He shook his head and then got up to stand by the railing. I can't explain it. I feel as if I just come out of a movie theatre after seeing the most amazing film on earth. He crossed his arms over his chest and turned to face the mountains. Here I am having tea with my wife and my friends in the very same village where my mother grew up until she had to leave this paradise because of a war that destroyed everything she knew or cared about. I am not the one with fortitude, Damien. She is. He fell silent. Remember what the book said, Dan. You are made of a cloth that will not accept defeat as an inevitable outcome. And your mother never accepted defeat as the inevitable outcome. Neither should you. I guess this task will be for her then, Dan concluded, returning to his seat.